Hello! So today we're taking a look at the Dornier 31 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's just been released today in the marketplace. It's the latest local legend released for Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's actually been developed by InnyBuilds and obviously licensed by Asobo to put into the simulator. So it was built in the 1960s, and I think I'm right in saying it's the only passenger carrying vertical landing or short takeoff vertical landing aircraft that's ever been developed. And if you have a look at it, it's quite unique. I will admit I had never seen it before it arrived in the simulator, so it was brand new on me, and I've just been having a little play with it to prepare for recording this video just to understand how to control it. And yeah, controlling it is very unique as well. So as you look around the aircraft, you will notice there are various vents around the aircraft, and that's to control airflow, so you maintain some control when you are at extreme low speeds. So I'm not sure that's been fully implemented in the simulator, because I don't think Flight Simulator can really do that, but it does give you some approximation of the way it would actually have been flown. So if you have a look at the engines strapped to the wings on this thing, they might look familiar to you because the exhausts look very, very similar to a Harrier, a Hawker Siddeley Harrier, or Harrier jump jet as you might know it. And there's a very good reason for that. So strapped to each wing of this aircraft is essentially the fuselage of a Harrier, so certainly the engine of a Harrier. So these are Rolls-Royce Pegasus engines, the same engine that was developed for the Harrier. So they've essentially strapped a Harrier to each wing of this aircraft, and that does present its own problems in that the controls for it are so complicated that the co-pilot, or certainly in Flight Simulator terms, the co-pilot takes over control of the engines when you're in low speed flight, because it would be just too much for a pilot to do on his own, controlling two Pegasuses at the same time. Also, in addition to that, on the end of each wing you've got these pods, and they are filled with turbines pointing straight down to provide more downward thrust during low speed operations. So let's go and have a little look inside the airplane as well before we go and take it for a flight. So InnyBuilds have done a fantastic job with this, it has to be said. If we come in through the cabin, it really is something else, isn't it? The modelling is just next level. I'm always blown away by the quality of 3D modelling that professional 3D and texture artists are capable of, and this is just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So if you stop the camera to look anywhere, it just all looks pretty much photographic throughout. It's very, very good. Anyway, enough looking around the aeroplane. Let's go and take it for a fly, shall we? So we'll go and jump into the cockpit, and we'll see about firing this thing up. So to start off, we have to go overhead. So I'm going to move around the cockpit using just the mouse and the keyboard to get things switched on. So the batteries come on, and we put the anti-collision lights on as well. And then to start the engines, we're going to look down at the back of the pedestal in the middle. And so we're going to go for the outer two switches, which is the master and ignition switch for the left engine, and then the starter for the left engine. Then we're going to spin around and look down here at the N2 gauge. And when that comes past about 18%, we can turn on the main engine fuel supply. So there we go. And that will then carry on round to about 60%. So while that's happening, we'll go outside and we can see that happening. You'll also see heat starting to form. You see the haze there. We're at China Lake, by the way, if you're wondering about the background. Okay, so the engine is just spooling up. So now the engine is running, we can turn the starter off, and we can turn the master and ignition on for the right engine and start the right engine. And in the same way, we watch the RPM. Wait for it to come past about 18%, and then we can go and switch on the right engine. or sorry, turn on the fuel supply to the right engine. I'm just going to check our volume levels, so we're looking good on the volume. Okay, so it's coming up towards stable speed. So once that's happened, we can turn the starter off, close the lid, and go overhead. And we can go and turn on the generators. And then we can come back down into the cockpit and go and turn the fuel pumps on. So these are the bank of switches, the back of the pedestal here, or front of the pedestal I should say. Okay, so now we have done that, let's have a little talk about this co-pilot. So on the pedestal over here, there's a whole bank of switches where their names are misnomers. They're actually controlling autopilot modes where the co-pilot helps you. And the same over here, there's a vertical takeoff landing mode where the co-pilot can jump in. But in order for the co-pilot to do that, you have to enable the co-pilot, and you do that by pressing this small button on the front fascia. So when you press that, this green light comes on, and at that point that means the co-pilot is helping you, and it means that the throttle throws have changed now. So in normal flight, you would be using, I'll just make sure I've got the wheel brakes on. In normal flight, you would be using throttles on the main engines, yeah? But when the co-pilot is in operation, you can control the lift fans and also the vectoring. But it also affects the throttles as well, look. So the axis number 3 is controlling everything at once, and the co-pilot is helping you do it. So while you might use engines 1 and 2, so the primary engines, or you might use the levers for them in normal flight. As soon as you have the green button pressed, you can use your axis number 3 to control everything in concert. Okay, so let's go and turn that green button back off for the moment. Actually no, we'll leave it on, but we just won't engage the levers. So we'll come off the parking brake and we're rolling. We'll go to takeoff flaps. And we'll just roll down the runway a little way at China Lake. We're not going to need the whole runway. And while we're doing it, we'll put the head tracking on so we can go and look at the F-18s as we pass by. So again, we're going to have some fun. So just looking outside before we get down to the runway, we've still got the cargo door open, which is fine. It's nice and flat around here, we're not going to damage it. So what we'll do is slow right down so we don't go barreling off the runway as we do this. We'll close. We want to show the... There we go. So we closed the cargo door. So we gave the people inside an unintended ride around the airfield. Okay, so there's a small amount of positive thrust with this aircraft. So I just want to show you something else before we go out to the runway. So remember, we've got the green button pressed. By having the green button pressed, that means the lift turbines are active on each side of the aircraft. So you'll also notice that if we go and push forwards on this, and push axis 3 all the way forwards, you'll suddenly, can you see the smoke pouring out there? It's a bit subtle to see, but it is there. So you don't have enough thrust to take off vertically. Okay. So we'll do a short takeoff, essentially. Okay, notice how it wallows. It doesn't fly like a conventional aircraft at all. So to begin with, we will fly it as a conventional aeroplane. And then we'll come back in over the airfield, slowly on purpose. Gear up. We'll turn off those lift fans, which will stow them. They'll automatically stow themselves anyway. So at this point we are flying as a normal aircraft. So all thrust is pointing backwards. Interesting looking aeroplane, isn't it? It's very, very well modelled. Okay, let's just get reciprocal of the runway. So without thrust, it actually becomes quite difficult to control. So what I'm going to do is go back to turbine mode. Now we're slower than 150 knots. Put the gear down to cause some drag, and put the flaps out to cause some more drag. And what we're going to do is rotate the nozzles through 45 degrees and try out some low speed handling. So if you hear the stall warning, that's almost unavoidable because of what we're trying to do here. So once you've got that green button pressed, axis 3 almost becomes axis 3 becomes your the angle of the nozzles, but your normal engine, your normal throttle axes become your vertical speed in a way. So obviously reducing thrust lowers the aircraft. So you're kind of flying it a little bit like a helicopter, if that makes sense. Takes a fair amount of practice to get the hang of it, of how you use the different throttles in combination with one another. Okay, let's go back round. So what we're going to try next is going to flick this switch, which puts the aircraft into hover mode essentially. So the co-pilot's going to help us. Like I said, it's actually remarkably difficult. I'm trying to force this into a turn, it's not having it. And I think that's because of that lack of reaction control. So although you can do like a managed approach from several miles out fairly easily, because the reaction control system isn't there, you can't really rotate around on your axis or anything like that, as you might be able to with a real Harrier or with the real Dornier 31, but I'm guessing. But it would appear there is no reaction control system. You can see if you play games with it, you can get it to a complete halt in the sky, basically. Okay, let's bring it in for a normal landing then. So if we turn the co-pilot off, go back to normal power, we'll bring it in for a normal-ish landing. Famous last words. So I think essentially this aeroplane really just is bumping up against the limitations of Flight Simulator. It's a really lovely idea, and there's some great concepts around, you know, how you can control it to allow you to use what's available in the simulator to simulate the way something like this might fly. It's just a shame it doesn't quite have the amount of fidelity you might wish it had. Not bad for about my second ever landing in it, is it? Okay, let's put the engines back to normal and roll in. Should go and park over by the F-35 over here. Park in between them just for a bit of fun. Okay. I have absolutely no idea how you shut the engines off in this thing. That did it. So there you go. It's about 40 years worth of development in between these two, but they essentially do the same job as each other. It's very cool, isn't it? It's a handful to fly, but like I said, I think that's because it's really butting up against what's possible in Flight Simulator. And no doubt the X-Plane crowd will come out of the woodwork saying, oh, you could make that work in X-Plane. Well, you could in Flight Simulator as well, but you'd be making a job for two people to fly one plane and trying to get one person to do it, and it would become an absolute nightmare. So it's a balancing act. But I think it's great fun. It's certainly different, and yeah, it's in the spirit of many of the local legends they've brought out. It's something a little bit different that a lot of people wouldn't have even thought of appearing in the sim, and I really like that. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. So that's the Dornier 31 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. See you again soon.